Our next set of presenters will be Dr. Troy Wiipongwii, affiliate faculty of the Global Research Institute, Dr. Zach Conrad from Wiipongwii, and Matthias Leu. And they will be speaking to us on food sovereignty, contributes to an essential component of indigenous sovereignty.
We are going to just be sharing with you a recent research project that we have just recently kicked off. This is a project to address indigenous food sovereignty in Virginia, but also in the surrounding states of Maryland and North Carolina. It has been really refreshing to hear some of the major themes that we've been talking about today also being featured prominently in this research project. Just briefly on sustainable land management, on education for indigenous nations, specifically around geographic information systems, and also on data transfer to indigenous communities. So we're going to be talking more about all of those, but first just allow us to briefly introduce ourselves, then we'll talk a little bit more about the project, and we're really delighted then to follow up with any questions that you all have. So I'm Zach Conrad. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Health Sciences at William & Mary. I am also a faculty affiliate at the Global Research Institute at William & Mary. And I am a nutritional epidemiologist and also a food system scientist. So what in the world does that mean? It means that my research is focused on looking at these relationships between the food that we eat, the health outcomes associated with those foods and those diet patterns, and then also the environmental impacts associated with those foods and those diet patterns. So I'm going to pass this on to our next speaker, Troy, and then to Matthias. And actually, my mistake, I'm going to pass this on to Matthias first, and then Troy will follow up.
Thanks for inviting us today. It's really an honor to be here. My name is Matthias Leu. I'm a faculty in the biology department, and I'm by training a spatial ecologist. And you might actually ask, what is a spatial ecologist doing with a food nutritionist? I'm helping in this exciting research to actually model agricultural suitability. And the reason why I'm so interested in that, prior to arriving at William & Mary, I was with the USGS, and I looked at large-scale human actions and how that actually affect biodiversity in the Intermountain West, particularly sage-grouse and sagebrush-associated species. And this has brought me here to this team because it's an exciting modeling exercise and a big challenge. I give it over to Troy.
Awesome, thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm going to give you a bit of background about me, share more personal things, because I'm not a traditional academic, even though I have a PhD. This project is something that's personal to me. As an adoptee, food has been the way that I've been able to connect with different communities throughout my entire life. So I kind of want to share a bit about that as well before kind of transitioning into talking about what we're working on. My background is a data scientist. I use artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to build decision support tools to kind of help kind of consumers as well as decision makers answer some really unique and complex problems. How was I adopted? My father was killed in 1992, November 13th, 1992. And he was just released from prison 3 weeks prior. He wrote a letter to his grandmother, Mary Atkins, while in prison, saying that he wanted to relocate back to Trail City and kind of raise his family down here. So 30 years ago, I would have been here if he wasn't taken away. One of his really close friends stepped up to take care of me and my family. They were South Asian, and I was kind of raised in that culture for a while. And that's kind of what my upbringing was until he was deported, and then I was adopted by my godparents, who were wealthy white people. I knew them most of my life up until that point, and it was a fantastic experience, and they loved me a lot, but I never really felt like home. And I remember my first day of school after being adopted, walking into the cafeteria and smelling food's very unique aroma to South Asian culture, something that I had experienced since my dad's passed. I'm sorry. And I just remember getting so excited and exclaiming in Hindi, "Wiipongwii!" I was just so excited to see the food and connect. And this was the first time I developed friends and felt like I was home since I got adopted. This has kind of been a theme throughout my life, just like I said, being able to connect with food. And then food's not just about community or culture. It started to develop more of a feeling for me, or an experience for me as I started going through my academic career and meeting Zach and things like that. My mom, she had cancer. There's a lot of environmental components to that, so I started thinking about food not just from the cultural community perspective, but also from the medicine perspective as well. And the pandemic hit. And it disenfranchised communities around the world were losing access to foods. So then food also became a security thing, a sovereignty thing. And you blend all of these components of medicine, culture, and community, and sovereignty, and all of the definitions that come with sovereignty. You think of different nations, tribal nations are nations, they're sovereign nations. Part of that tribal identity could be cuisine and things like that. And that's a very complex topic in the United States. And as I started thinking more about this, it kind of brought me kind of into full view of what I was most passionate about as an academic, as an entrepreneur, and also as one of your community members. And I got a chance to meet Zach while I was finishing up my dissertation and meeting Matthias, and we got to talk about this project. And we really saw potential here. So I reached out to a couple of community members, different tribes, and got some really positive feedback on this idea of thinking through, from my background and Zach's background, what we could do to kind of support this idea of Indigenous food sovereignty. So we created a proposal for the Jeffers Trust to build a decision support tool that would basically bring in biophysical models, geospatial models, and have basically decision makers within the communities be able to input certain information and have output information on how much land would be needed, how much agricultural inputs, such as land, fertilizer, nutrients, pest management, irrigation, water, would be required to support their communities, and being self-sufficient in that is a key component of that self-sovereignty piece. But yeah, so the higher arching project is that we want to build these models, which aren't the in solution for the communities for food sovereignty, but definitely when we think through all of this complex information that we have to rely on to make these decisions, this tool can help narrow the search space.
So this project is really grounded in this idea, this powerful idea that the information and data that originates in these Indigenous communities is really going to cycle back into these Indigenous communities. And the way that we're doing this is we are really just greasing the wheels in this process. This is a project that's really led by an Indigenous Advisory Council, which we're in the process of forming, and we're hoping that many of you will join us in that pursuit. It's incredibly important, actually essential, that you are really the main voice in guiding how this project is taking shape, informing us what is important that you would like to know about your lands, about how you would like to manage your lands, what we can do with the tools that we have developed and the skills that we've developed to help you achieve your food sovereignty goals. So components of the study really are originating from this Indigenous Advisory Council, but also we're really excited and hope that we'll have the opportunity to be getting direct feedback from your, not just the tribal leaders, but also the Indigenous community members. We're bringing in publicly available data. We would like to ground truth that from you all, your communities and your tribal leaders. And the end goal is to create these decision support tools, otherwise known as computer software, that will be specifically tailored to each of the tribal nations in Virginia, in Maryland, and then also in North Carolina. So we're just going to speak a little bit more in depth about what this project is going to look like.
So I'm going to talk first about the first objective, and that's basically to create a model that delineates the agricultural suitability within Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. And we've done a pilot project with some help from undergraduate students to actually delineate where the tribal lands are in the state of Virginia. And this is where we're reaching out to this wonderful community here to ask for your help to, first of all, check what we already have, if that's even correctly done, and secondly, what information are we missing? So we really need your help to delineate where the current tribal boundaries are. So that's the major first step. And ultimately, we're building this agricultural suitability model on the basis of several abiotic and biotic factors. So we are interested in erosion control. Really important information then is what are the soil characteristics, what is the terrain. We'll rely heavily there on LiDAR data to actually delineate the topographic ruggedness of a given land. Is it even suitable for agriculture? Where are the more plateau areas versus the steep areas where agriculture is probably less likely to be beneficial? What is the current land use surrounding the tribal lands? That has very important implications for thinking about pollination. There's a lot of research now showing that agricultural land near wildlands actually have higher rates of pollination. And so things like that will then go into the abiotic model. And then lastly, a very important part is what are the current climate conditions? And there's pretty good models out there that we can use to provide that information. But then more importantly, what are the climate changes with a horizon of about 2040 in mind? And we chose that horizon because the climate data at that point is fairly reliable. If you go beyond that temporal window, the reliability really starts to decrease exponentially. So the combination of these various GIS products will then feed into the next step of the project. And one thing that I learned that today is, I think, an important part of this first objective would be to integrate high school students, native high school students that could actually come and see what we're doing, how the tools are applied, and we'd be more than happy to actually integrate them into part of the research and show them what we can do with these GIS platforms.
I promised my collaborator that I would stay seated. I just can't help myself. Thanks.
Famous last words.
Famous last words, that's right. So, Matthias just described the first model. I know it's hard to see here, but it's objective 1, right, which is our geospatial model. That is going to feed, once we know how much land is available to be sustainably farmed, that then is going to be used as input for this second objective, this biophysical model, which is in the middle. That's going to tell us how much land can be sustainably farmed for different types of crops. Importantly, how many people can be fed a healthy diet from food that's produced on these tribal lands. And then also what the agricultural resources are required. So pest management, fertilizer, nutrients, and irrigation water. And importantly, something that I just want to turn back to that we've talked about a few times today is what is going to be the educational component and the data transfer. That's an important part of this project, and we're really pleased to be partnering with the Institute for Integrative Conservation, John Swaddle and colleagues that have presented earlier today, They, as had been mentioned all too briefly though, was that they have launched a pilot course that is designed to train Indigenous tribal members on GIS methods, and as part of this project, we are generating new data that's been ground truthed by these communities, and this is an important way for us to then transfer that data. One way to transfer that data into these communities, not just directly by developing these computational tools for the tribal nations, but then also to provide these data directly to the members of these communities that are going to be engaged in this educational curriculum. So at all parts of this project, to emphasize, we are going to be getting more than just input, but direction from the Indigenous Advisory Council, but then also from the community members of these tribal regions. I'll sit back down.
So if some of that jargon is over your head, that's cool. It's over mine as well. I put together a couple of graphics of what a decision support tool could look like for this type of project. All of that information is going on in the background, and decision makers would have access to a user interface where they can input data kind of like this. There would obviously need to be some more data. And then you can generate reports, generate maps that can tell you kind of based on, as Zach was saying, like once we get that ground truth, which areas are most suitable for which types of crops. And these crops, these combinations of food are based on kind of creating constraints around preferences by the community, health needs, sustainability, but also economics as well. So all of this is going on in the background. You can generate maps or reports. In the next slide, this is an example of what a report could look like. Obviously, more information than that. This report shows that the nation currently has a shortage of land to feed its entire population. These are the plots that we were able to create, and based on all of that analysis going on in the background, again, this is completely fake data. We could grow XYZ crop. This is some of the input that you would need for that. Again, cost could be added. And then if you look below, it shows you current population, current land required to feed, what's currently considered farmable land, what that deficit is. And again, because this is a decision support tool, we can't just leave you like that and say, okay, so what do we do? You can generate more reports that can show you what available land is there that has a historical connection to the tribe, that's also farmable. Is it currently available to be sold? How much is it? Or how can you reacquire it as a part of this entire food sovereignty component? So the idea is take all that complex stuff that's going on in the background and to be able to give you something simple like this to make those decisions moving forward. And yeah, so we come here today really, again, trying to have a conversation about what we're working on. But the next steps for us is really building out that Indigenous Advisory Council. So some of the chiefs have been gracious enough to provide letters of support to work with us. And then after meeting Dr. Edwards and learning more about VTEC, we really thought that it could be a good idea to use VTEC as a medium for building out that advisory council with the federally recognized tribes and us doing additional work to work with the state tribes, as well as the tribes in Maryland and North Carolina as well. So yeah, that's the next step for us as we continue to build up this project. But I thank you all for listening and having us here. I really appreciate it.
And hopefully we have time for maybe a few questions. Does that work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Any questions? 4 minutes.
Sorry, Lisa's got a problem.
That's a great question, and just to repeat for those of you on the other side of the room, the question was about whether we'd be able to factor in costs, so food costs, right? And indeed, we would be able to do that. We have data sets that are able to tell us what the cost of individual foods and ingredients are, but then we're able to aggregate that to entire diets as well.
Yeah, when we spoke with the Upper Matthias Leu, Lee was saying that they were putting in place some things in terms of data sovereignty, and kind of just being sensitive to that. What we hope with building out the council is the community will tell us what information they want to keep within the community. We know as you're purchasing new lands, that could be an issue for external forces who are saying, oh gosh, XYZ group is taking over, so the need to obfuscate that information or keep that private is very important. As Zach mentioned, building out these data sets, we would like to return that information, just hand it back over in general, and request access to that to the extent that we need it.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to elaborate that on very briefly, data sovereignty is a really critical component of this project, and we are building, through the course of the project, a data sovereignty protocol that will allow us to adhere to the key principles that have been expressed by the Indigenous leaders, but then also the community members. I think there's two components too. It's how much information is being shared with us. What information do we need to carry out this project, and what information do we not need? It's not essential to carry out this project. But then what's the information that we're generating and then sharing in the public domain or in scientific articles? And all of that is going to be directed by the council.
That's great.
That ultimately the extent of the analysis is such that tribal communities can actually make their own decisions with our products without revealing what the final intentions are.
That's great.
Will you please be a part of our Indigenous advisory group? This is exactly the type of feedback. This is precisely the feedback that we're looking for. And those are very helpful comments and questions. So are we going to be incorporating advanced farming techniques? And indeed, to the extent that the communities are expressing that as an interest, right? There are, in some cases, there's sure to be some communities that may have an interest, just presupposing here, and perhaps extended backyard farming and more community-based farming that's not as commercial in scale, but others will surely be interested in more commercial farming that is able to draw on some of the more advanced farming techniques like precision agriculture that we have available to us. So that is all going to be incorporated at the discretion of the communities themselves, and we do hope to be able to integrate that into our model framework. To the extent that this project is going to have implications for training the next generation of agricultural stewards, we certainly hope that is going to be one of the outcomes of this project. It's not centrally baked into the design of this project, but we have a number of exciting ideas for the next steps that this type of project would take. That would be one of them. Very briefly, another one is there are some really innovative ideas to connect actual culinary food production, right, to the communities that are interested in consuming that food. So whether that would be farm-to-school programs, but also in restaurants, right, that are Indigenous owned and operated. So those are all next steps as from this project, but we appreciate that question and the feedback.